Hello and welcome, fellow motorsports fans. We've had an epic week filled with karting action, including the first ever World Championship appearance for Robin Räikkönen, which we're going to be talking all about, but of course we will also include all things single-seater racing, Italian F4 FRECA, you name it. But we begin in the world of karting. The Rotax World Finals took place in Italy this weekend, and as such it is, not an official World Championship, not an FIA classified World Championship, but in the world of Rotax karting it very much acts as a World Championship with lots and lots of international racers going up against each other, and we did have some surprising faces making appearances on the podiums. We begin with the micro categories, the youngest of these racers below the age of 10, and here Su-Ting Chang and Luke Millward came into the final as heavy favourites after basically dominating the pre-final together. Millward then unfortunately went out of the race pretty early in a wreck with Lucien Smith, so a bit of a disappointment there. Instead, Austin Oman and Joshua Cook, the Cookie Monster, did save the day for Team UK, with Joshua Cook ultimately drafting past Su-Ting Chang for the win. Still a maiden podium for Taiwan, the first ever at these events, so a pretty cool storyline there. And then of course we had a new fan favourite, Robin Räikkönen, taking part in this race. It is only his second ever international appearance. We've talked about his international debut in the WSK series a couple of weeks ago. And I am very happy to report that here he did a lot better than a couple of weeks ago. He was not an anonymous midfielder or backmarker or anything. He firmly put himself into the conversation of the midfield win, fighting at around like P8. I think he finished P8, just about lost out in the midfield win to Kiwi Nixon Cripps, but nonetheless a very, very solid event for the young Finn. Over in the minis, we had a heartbreaking final for fan favourite Albie Friend. He was the man of the weekend throughout the entire weekend, and obviously just from everything he's won this year, he would have by far been the most fitting champion in the class, at least for my money. But he just about lost out in an epic final to Zdeněk Babicek. At least the young Czech was my second favourite to win the race, so I guess a neat little storyline there. Nikita Lyubimov also mixing it up with the strong British frontrunners, so nice to see some of the, less famous Eastern European racing nations doing well, I suppose, but one more disappointment for Team UK, and this is a bit of a storyline throughout the entire event, where the UK is basically the force to be reckoned with in international Rotax racing, because it is also like the strongest national category, so naturally it translates pretty well to the international stage, and also all of the Rotax European Series frontrunners are basically British, or not all, but like most of them. So to have this one title go away is already a bit of a disappointment, and it's a trend, as we'll see in a second. In the juniors, we had a guest-ish start for Scott Marsh and then also Cameron Nelson, both at the top, but they quickly made contact, which allowed one of our fan favourites to take the win. Jacob Ashcroft came out ahead in the little scrap and basically ran away with the race from there. Now, it's his rookie year. He is, well, a massive fan favourite. He has been in the last couple of years anyway, and so far he has always missed out on the big world title. His dad was crying on the broadcast, so all the emotions there, and a really neat storyline. At least here, success for Team UK, and really goes to show how much talent the UK has in these like young karting ranks. It is a bit ridiculous, really. Quick shout out to one of our female favourites, Yvonne Simonova, fighting well at the sharp end all weekend long, even if she did get roughed up in the final, so she doesn't have the result to show for how well she's been driving all weekend long, but at least she did show that she can fight at the sharp end against the men, even on this like international stage, so congratulations there, I suppose. Last but not least, in the Rotax world, we had the seniors, and here this is really the biggest blunder that Team UK has pulled throughout the event. We had the mad amount of 7 potential British winners in this race, with Callum Bradshaw, Kai Hunter, Lewis Gilbert, Harry Bartle, Matthew Higgins, Sean Butcher and Macaulay Bishop, all front running, all well in the top 10 in terms of pace. And we still did not get a British win, because essentially they just kept crashing into each other and taking each other out, and then a bunch of penalties on top. And well, once the dust had settled, it was a young Belgian, Vic Stevens, who sort of just got away with the win in the chaos. It's really cool to finally see him win a race. I had to actually go back and check. He hasn't won a single final in the last 2 years, which is quite surprising because he is a serial front runner on the European stage. But yeah, usually using out to the overwhelming British majority, I suppose. Macaulay Bishop somehow in P2 despite last lap contact, but there was so many penalties to go around. That's how I think he ended up in P2. To be honest, I'm not even entirely sure. This was a proper mess of a race. But if you only have one race you can go back to and watch from this event, it is definitely this one. This was proper entertainment, even if it was a big fuck up from Team UK. This was far from all in the world of karting this weekend. I said it's going to be a kart-heavy episode because we also had the Trofeo delle Industrie, just, well, essentially a couple of kilometers away, also in Italy. And here in the mini under-10s, we had two very distinct stories playing out, in my opinion. First of all, we had, well, serial winner, I've talked about him loads, Nicolo Perico going up against Antonio Ianni for the win, both in the pre-final and the final. Truth be told, Ianni did kind of looked like the quickest kid all weekend, but Perico's experience prevailed in the end. He just about got back into the lead at the right time to take the win for himself. To be fair, fitting end to a stellar year, but really not much we can say about this because, well, that's what he's been doing all year long. On a more interesting note though, we did have a couple of the German mini races doing really well, coming over from their national German campaign to compete internationally. In the case of Henry Möhring, he's been doing this a few times. In the case of Devin Titz, I do think this was his international debut. I might be wrong there. At least it's the first time he did something meaningful. Möhring ended up finishing P6, which was a really good run for him. And I've just found out later he was also sick during the pre-final and the finals. So extra congratulations there, I think, to a job well done. In Devin Titz's case, unfortunately, he did find himself going backwards in the final after running P4 for a long time. But of course, it isn't about result, it's about the, potential he's displayed. And this was a really good event, especially if I'm correct, and it was actually his international debut. Then, with the slightly older kids in the mini group 3, we had once again a very fitting storyline, as it was Daniel Miron Lorente winning his last race in the mini category in style with lights to flag victory. Yet again, his main challengers, again another theme, were Mason Robertson and Alexander Legenki. Personally, at this point, I really just can't wait to see what Legenki can do once these two disappear and graduate into the juniors. Like I said, Miron Lorente has confirmed he will indeed step up going into next season. Talking about those stepping up, in the OK Juniors we had a big team switch making the headlines with Filippo Sala switching from Ricky Flynn Motorsports to Forza Racing, the very successful Forza Racing outfit that has won the last 2 European titles in the class. And well, what can I say? He switched teams and went on to entirely dominate the event, start to finish, running away in all of the sessions that I've seen, basically. So yeah, what a start to what will certainly be a super dangerous partnership going into 2025. We've talked about it recently that, yeah, who of the Forza kids will step up now that Dries van Langendonk is gone? And yeah, there's a new challenger emerging all of a sudden. It was also at least a bit of a feel-good story for Noah Baglin, holding on to P2 all race long in a very good defensive drive to sort of finally make up for his World Championship heartbreak. But the standout performance here for me was actually Ukrainian Krutogolov. I forgot his first name all of a sudden, but this is by far the best I've seen him drive all year long to take a podium. I don't think I've ever really seen him as a front runner, so congratulations there, and I do hope we see more of it. There's really quite a few quick Ukrainians coming up the ranks. I really quite like it. Last but not least, we had some shift the karting action, and once again this event was just feel-good stories all around for me personally. We had Christian Bertuca continuing what he did at the World Championship, not dominating the event, that would definitely be too far, but he did still win it more or less comfortably ahead of team leader Riccardo Longhi. So a Birol Art 1-2. Very fitting. Obviously the team has dominated everything in KZ2 this year really, and Bertuca has been the ace of the operation, so congratulations. Unfortunately for me personally, Marcus Kayak just can't really catch a break. He did dominate the pre-final, but he did get roughed up in the final and knocked off the podium by William Lanzani. So a bit disappointing there. He just can't get all the results he deserves, but I guess still German champion and high up in the European. So a very good year for the Estonian as well. And then last but not least in the world of karting, we also had the Motorsport Games, and unfortunately this event has been largely disappointing for my money, and I think it's mainly because it clashed with both the Rotax World Finals and the Trofeo delle Industrie, and it's not like a super huge prestigious event here, so naturally the entry list was a little disappointing, especially in the minis. Xavier Lazaro ended up winning the mini category, but he is only one of 3 drivers, so I knew from this field, so I think that says a fair bit. Lazaro isn't a bad driver, but normally he is very, midfield-ish in the WSK series, for example, so yeah, not the most meaningful win I've ever seen. In my opinion, the best race was in the juniors, where we had a fantastic race between George Edgar sort of stealing the show against all odds to take gold for the UK, because he was actually going up against some of the big boys from European competitions like Sophia Flörsch, Bosco Arias, Arjen Kraling, Van Rooyen. So lots and lots of good European front runners to fight and beat, and he actually did. And I also have to say, I've seen George Edgar race, I think, but he never really stood out and he doesn't do much European competition, so really this is a great achievement and a win to remember. Another interesting thing we had playing out in the juniors though was the female battle going on throughout the weekend, and this was actually, I guess, out of all the events, the most female talent stacked together in one event, if that makes sense. And most importantly, we had Chiara Batic, her last race in the juniors, I believe, and multiple time Swiss karting champion. And again, much like with Simonova in the Rotax juniors, the end result doesn't quite do her justice at all, because she actually had a really good weekend. She even put it on pole position, and then yeah, she just didn't get rewarded for it in the final with an incident very early on. Quite unfortunate there. Instead it was Klara Kowalczyk taking the best female medal in the end, with also a very good midfield run, I believe, ending up around P8. So a good female grid there, and at least something making this event a little more meaningful. And then last but not least, in the seniors, basically the real story was only the controversial pass for the gold medal when Marcus Silkunas pushed off weekend dominator Ruben Moya, obviously front runner in the IAME Euro Series, to take lead and victory. Silkunas finally with a major result to show for his efforts, so I suppose that is pretty cool, because usually, well, he has been second quite a bit in these lesser series this year. Unfortunately, my personal favorite going into the weekend, David Cosmo Christopher, did nothing. He was nowhere to be found. I don't really know what happened there, but if anyone happens to be Romanian and have any insight, please let me know down below. And otherwise, we finally move on to car racing. We transition to car racing, but we stay at the Motorsport Games, because there was also the F4 portion of the event playing out, and unfortunately a very similar storyline to what we've had with the karting. The lineup suffered big time from being at the same time as the Italian F4 final. At least that's what I think happened. Most importantly, for example, this took away the opportunity for any appropriate German representative to be there, because well, Maxim Rehm was racing in Italy and he is the only German competing on an F4 level. So there you go, only one of many nations missing in this event. But I really have to say, more curiously, was where were the other Spanish F4 competitors? Because essentially this event was, you know, closely linked to Spanish F4, obviously taking place in Spain, but also Spanish F4 teams running the cars. The drivers were not allowed to compete for the same team they compete in the regular season with, but still, I guess it would make sense to expect lots of people from the Spanish F4 paddock to compete in this event. And on the one hand, that's exactly what happened, but there was still lots and lots of big names missing, with, you know, nations that thus weren't represented, like René Lammers and Enzo Tanvanicul really standing out for me personally, but also Mattia Colnaghi, Maciej Gladish, Keanu Alazari. So plenty of front runners from non-represented nations that could have been there, should have been there, but weren't. So Naturally, I have to say, the event didn't feel too meaningful. We had Juan Cota going into it as the favorite, and at least he did absolutely deliver on this, controlling the show ahead of Andres Cardenas and even David. Unfortunately, even David did get penalized after the race for track limits, since there was Razor Siburfan inheriting the last podium. So a decent result there. Really the main standout thing in this bracket for me was Cardenas finally back to being a front runner after what was a thoroughly forgettable year in the Spanish F4. The event did at least provide a pretty good opportunity to, you know, sort of judge the abilities of the French, the Japanese and the Brazilian F4 together, because we had some representative of these series competing with Chester Kiffer, Moriyama, Trapper and Comparato all present at the event. And here really most unfortunately were more a surprise on the negative side of things. For example, Kiffer was a bit underwhelming for my money, but the standout here was really Moriyama, who in the Japanese F4 is very well established as a midfielder, I guess. So I just hadn't really expected him to be quite as high up in the midfield as he was. A decent run there, but as I said, overall, unfortunately, not really a particularly meaningful event. On the flip side, we did have the final round of the like the Euro 4 round we had a couple of weeks ago, so entertaining but a little disappointing in terms of a let's take anything from these results perspective. Freddie Slater has established a new record with 15 wins over the season, even if he did have to concede the last race with a very, you know, unfortunate late race safety car, just as he was side by side with Gianmarco Pradel. So Pradel got his maiden win at the last time of asking. Congratulations there. Really, for these last couple of races, the real story was the rookie title fight, continuing one of my favorite rivalries in junior racing at the moment, Keen Nakamura Berta versus Alex Powell, and they were fighting it out not just in the standings, but actually on track until the very last race, with Alex Powell coming out just ahead by beating Keen Nakamura Berta to P3 in the last race of the year. So a very cool battle decided on track. That's exactly what we like to see. We did have, as is tradition at this point, a couple of late season debuts. Sadly, most of them were not particularly exciting. We had Dante Vinci, a bit of an also ran in European karting competition over the last couple of years, and naturally, late season debut, he didn't really do anything. Then we had Ciro Sobral, a midfielder from the Brazilian F4 coming over, and again, naturally, he didn't really do anything. This isn't the expectation, by the way, but like, the names themselves weren't even particularly exciting for the most part. Probably the most interesting bit was Art entering two cars for Bianca Bustamante and Leah Block. Now, neither of them were really up to the task of doing anything, but this may be some foreshadowing of Art actually competing in F4 outside of F1 Academy next season, which I think would be really cool if they could also establish themselves as a proper junior team, taking you all the way from F4 to F2 even. They would have the infrastructure at that point, obviously. Then we also had Kirill Kutskov coming over from obviously the Central European F4 with Mafia Racing. And we've been talking a couple times throughout the year, how bad is the Mafia car? Can they even do anything? Obviously with these backmarker 1 or 2 car outfits, you never really know what to make of them. Here we do know what to make of them, because Kirill Kutskov actually had a pretty great time and even scored in the second race. So it goes to show, yeah, sure, the car won't win any races, but the driver can certainly make a huge difference. Granted, tricky conditions throughout the weekend probably further helped him, but still, great result, and it goes to show you probably should never write off people just because of the car alone. Then our quick new segment in Italian F4, Bondi Watch. Alexander Bondarev slowly picking up the pace compared to last time out. A pretty good effort in qualifying in particular. Unfortunately, he did have accidents in, I think, all 3 races, so the weekend was just as messy as the last one. He was right in the thick of it, and there aren't really any conclusions to draw. But I guess, yeah, the good quali is a very, very positive sign for a full assault next year. And then last but not least, I do want to highlight Akshay Bora for his really mature driving, keeping his nose clean all weekend and like slowly rising through the ranks in every single one of these races, despite not having the proper raw front running pace of some of his peers. And he has really earned himself P4 in the standings overall. And really, it was a sick season. On the flip side, here Yamakoshi had a weekend to forget, with Johnson generally looking quicker as well, but he still has firmly cemented himself in P2 of the standings with his remarkable consistency early in the year, and also not just like very good spree of results. Certainly a couple of drivers to watch. Obviously we know this from the past and everything, but like really the top half of this Italian F4 table is mega good. These are the drivers to watch. There's a reason that they might as well call it the F4 World Cup at this point and not the Italian Championship, because really this is the place to be if you're an up-and-coming world-class driver. We also had the last race of FRECA at Monza, with the season finishing in style with a win for Rafa Kamara. Unfortunately, a tad underwhelming. The second race was proper messy, so the season also ended a little prematurely under a red flag after Ricky Louis took himself out, and then also the poor just about recovering Birambakti. So like I said, just the tip of the iceberg of a very messy weekend in FRECA all around. And I guess it is a combination of running a bunch of young drivers on Monza together in the last round of the year, with mix in some tricky conditions, and you do have a recipe for disaster in that sense. Although I do have to say the second race was, I believe, entirely dry, so there's no real excuse, boys. Keep it together a little more going forward, please. Either way, we had Yugo Chugbo with a stellar drive in the first race to dominate the wet event there. And this is now a trend we have picked up on with the wet weather proficiency that Yugo Chugbo has been displaying. Of course, his season as a whole has been largely underwhelming, but this has been the one common thing. Whenever the track has been wet, Yugo has been looking really quick. So this really makes you think, what's the deal here? Is, I don't know, something wrong with his car and in the wet he can make up for it? I highly doubt it. I guess he might just be a wet weather specialist. I just hope he does pick up his dry pace again going into F3. Unfortunately, the season for him ended quite fittingly, but in a bad way, with a big error in the second race, dropping him from a podium down to like well down the top 10. So ending the season like he started it, just a little disappointing. Much like Italian F4, we also had rookie title talk going on here, and this time it's Noah Stromstedt deservedly locking in the title, not only with his stellar mid-season run of P2s, but also because the other drivers simply, I mean, it sounds harsh, but I don't think they deserved it. Gilter maybe you can make the best case for, but in particular Pedro Claro, and even more so even Dominguez, just kept getting into trouble in the second half of the year. Pedro Claro had every chance this round to, at the very least, take the fight to Stromstedt, and he just couldn't do anything about it. A little bit disappointing. If I had to give an outlook, I'd say all of these definitely should stay for another year to mature. There's big potential there. I do really like Claro. I do really like Gilter. Dominguez I'm still not super sure about, but obviously he was also very quick in F4, so lots of potential, but not the way you want to finish this kind of season. Very different story for Teo Finau, who finished the season exactly how he wanted to, with a pair of really hard-fought P2s. He continues to just be a treat to watch, really aggressive racing. It always feels like he is really trying to make the most of the package. Now he's got Santalock, yeah sure, not providing front-running equipment consistently, or really not at all. But as I said, he is just there driving the wheels of the thing, really making the most of it, and an excellent young driver to watch. And like I said, just a fun guy to watch as well. Super racy. It looks like he's, I guess, going to be returning for next season. And if he ends up in any slightly better team, he will be a certain title threat. Now, of course, both Italian F4 and FRECA are like two of the most important feeder series, so technically they would deserve their own review video. As you can tell from the channel history, I've not even gone around to actually recording and editing the F3 review video, which I've prepared like a month ago. So don't hold your breath, it'll come, but I'm not going to make any promises as to when. either way, these are the series that certainly deserve a standalone video to properly cover all of the midfield action and give the back markers their time in the spotlight and everything. For now, instead, we will focus on the fastest cars. Obviously, F1 was back and we had a dominant weekend for Carlos Sainz in quali and the race. Really sort of a fantastic early farewell for his Ferrari days. This might be the peak of his Ferrari days, basically. And I am really looking forward to see his, stint at Williams, to see if he can help build the team up and, drag it to the front where it probably belongs. Obviously, remains to be seen. Obviously, he's not a World Championship candidate in any sense of the word, but Carlos Sainz is sort of the definition of an overperforming midfielder, I suppose, like really making the most of that particular midfield status, even if he's not a superstar driver. Even more fun than watching Carlos Sainz do really well was beloved Liam Lawson getting not only his elbows out, but then also getting his finger out both towards Perez. I do really like that he's got that sort of confidence about him, even though he just got back into an F1 car after waiting for years for this opportunity, really, and to immediately not only be rough on the racetrack, but also sort of off the track, or rather like in how he interacts with the others. He is clearly here to stay and he's not afraid to make a statement really early on, and I love it. Unfortunately, said aggressive racing and making statements has gone a little too far in the case of Lando Norris and Max Verstappen, with a sort of controversial 2 10-second penalties for Verstappen, and obviously that was by far the most discussed topic of the weekend, and I want to give my 2 cents. And for me, really, the one thing that stands out in the whole discussion is how were both of these penalties 10 seconds? I don't see a world where that really makes sense. Sure, I'm sure there's some sort of basis for it in the rules, or they couldn't be doing it. But to me, I'm not judging whether or not 10 seconds was too much for the first one or too little for the second one. I don't really care either way, to be entirely honest. But I just think the first incident was a minor miscalculation. I mean, we all know he was going to shove Norris off the track there, but the miscalculation was his nose just wasn't 5 centimeters further ahead. Otherwise, it would have been legal. So that's just very rough racing. You slightly did it too much. You probably should be, well, you need to be penalized for it, but probably a small penalty should do the trick there. Whereas the second one, in my book, is just that's dangerous driving. That was a big send into a very fast corner, entirely unexpected for Norris. Really the only explanation being maybe he thought Norris was going to return the position, but even then you can't just assume things and fire it into a corner and run everyone off the road. So that was really inappropriate, and sure, Verstappen is playing the championship game. I respect him from that point of view that, yeah, he will do everything to maximize his title chances, and this is sort of within the rules. He got punished according to the rules and it still ended up being worth it for him. So don't hate Verstappen for it, but the rules certainly need changing. And I know this is like an easy thing to say, everyone seems to agree on this, but we need harsher penalties for actual egregious driving like this was. And we need a better form of clarification for the old can you run people off or can't you? Because just being ahead by a centimeter on the apex, I think, is just a bit of a stupid rule. I know there's various different approaches in different series, and of course, just because of how, first of all, fragile the cars are, but also just the level of driving applied in terms of just everything, the standards we need to hold these drivers to. I understand why we need very, very precise rules, but then if you need precise rules, then please invest some time and actually make them any good. Instead of just ranting about rules and racing incidents, I want to highlight Haas quietly establishing themselves as best of the rest with another double score performance here. I truly think it is fantastic to see. It really turns out, I guess, Günther Steiner was the problem after all. Who would have known that the not really super professional team principal was maybe holding his team back just a little bit. And then combine this with obviously now Haas. I don't think we've talked about it. They have a new technical partnership with Toyota going forward. So the future also looks bright. This, if anything, looks like the upwards trend may actually continue for once and not just be one flash in the pan and then just disappear for next year. The whole Toyota move has had me speculating though, Does this explain why Toyota has pushed Rita Mummiata to F2 for this season, because they were planning this move with Haas? And does this mean, if his performance suggests it's a good idea, that we could see Rita Mummiata in F1 in 2026 as a Toyota associated driver? I don't know, let me know your thoughts down in the comments if you think that was Toyota's idea all along. I don't know, I'm just speculating, but it certainly wouldn't seem entirely unlikely, would it? Anyway, let's discuss a couple news before we go. The news segment should be very quick this time around. We barely had any announcements. 3 new drivers confirmed for F3 next year. First of all, Matthias Zagazater confirmed to, call it how you want, staying at Genza, I guess. Well, he'll be the first driver signed to DAMS, whichever way you want to put it. I've said a couple weeks ago, he is one of those fringe cases where you can certainly make the case he probably shouldn't be returning. He didn't really show much potential, but I think he has just about done enough last season to warrant this on merit as well, and not just on money. So I think it's cool to see him return, if only because he is also from a massively underrepresented nation in the racing world. Then we had the announcement that Bruno Delpino is indeed joining the MP team for next year, like we could sort of guess from the testing lineup. Obviously, Bruno Delpino, I think, very deserved for the step up. We can discuss why is it him and not Javier Sagrera. Truth be told, for my money at least, they were very, very equal in Euro Cup 3. And while I understand that you would like to see people promoted on merit and Sagrera be rewarded for finishing ahead of Delpino, probably in the title fight, but yeah, at the end of the day, money talks, and if one can pay more than the other and they're pretty equally good, then good choices for everyone, I suppose. And then last but not least, we had the no surprising move of Callum Voisin staying at Roden. Ever since Slater was confirmed to be doing a FRECA program, this was more than obvious. Voisin obviously incredibly deserved of returning for next year, and I do hope if Roden continues their form from late season, he might be able to insert himself into the title fight. At least I think the driving he's displayed suggests he can. And then we had a couple of American news. First of all, Escotto confirmed to Andretti IndyNXT. That's a bit of a no news for me. I guess we could sort of guess that he's staying in IndyNXT anyway. I think it's a pretty reasonable move, but nothing I am particularly exciting about. Way more exciting is that Sophia Flörsch has been testing with HMD for IndyNXT. Now, obviously, this is no confirmation, and usually I don't include rumors on the channel, but this one was too interesting to ignore in a slow news week as well, because this could mean, depending on what Jamie Chadwick ends up doing, we could get an epic female battle in IndyNXT on one of the highest levels of single-seater racing, basically, aside from the couple of fully professional series, right? This is right up there with F3, I suppose, in a similar region. So I'd be all for this duel. Obviously, Chadwick is trying to find an IndyCar seat for next season instead. I would personally hate if Flörsch comes, but Chadwick sort of dodges the battle by going to IndyCar. Either way, I think very cool news, and it would be an interesting step for Flörsch, although we can't forget this year has been absolutely horrible from her point of view, so I am not expecting too much, although I also still believe this year was at least a little bit of an outlier. Anyway, let me know if you would like this move. Let me know if you think Flörsch has underperformed this year or if this is just her level. And otherwise, I thank you all for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one.